Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with the Actually Tiny House Project, where we are exploring smart, simple, sustainable tiny house design and giving you some building tips along the way. Now, I'm really excited about today's video because it covers a topic that I had a lot of questions about when we first started planning this tiny house, and that is how to manage boxing out around the wheel wells. Now, I'm sure that there's somebody out here who's already done it the way that I'm going to show you today, but from the information that I could find at the time, most people are doing this with little 2x4 walls or 2x2s, putting some insulation in there, and then covering it with whatever they're covering the rest of the inside of the trailer with. Now, there's certainly nothing wrong with doing it that way. I just feel like that whole operation could be made a lot lighter, a lot more space saving, a lot better insulated, and a lot more airtight. And that's why I decided to go with a different approach here, which is to build a really simple plywood box and covering the interior with rigid foam insulation and then mounting the whole thing to permanently mounted cleats on the floor and on the side wall of the trailer. All right, so let's start out here by talking about plywood. Now, the plywood that I'm using for this project is 1/2 inch with a little bit of 3/4 inch Russian or Baltic birch. Now, what this stuff is just kind of your standard cabinet maker's plywood. It's a really dense plywood with lots of layers, which makes it really strong. It makes it really stiff. It accepts fasteners well. It also has a really nice surface that you could sand down and you can just stain it or paint it without having to do any additional work to it. So even though you could get away with a lower grade of plywood for this, I'm a really big fan of spending a little bit extra and getting the nice birch ply because it just makes the whole process of doing this so much easier. Now, if you don't have a good table saw set up at home, you might consider having them cut this down with the panel saw to roughly the dimensions you want it. And then when you get home, it'll be easier to manage the pieces on your regular table saw. Another good way to break down sheets is to do it with a circular saw and a guide. They sell really expensive guides for this, but you don't need to buy them. But what I would recommend, not just for this, but for so many uses inside your build, is an 8-foot aluminum straight edge. This thing can seem like kind of an indulgence, and you think to yourself, I don't really need to get an 8-foot aluminum straight edge, but if you buy one, you're gonna thank yourself so many times during the course of your build. You can clamp it onto a sheet of plywood, you can cut things really accurately, although a table saw always does a little bit cleaner work. All right, so now that we've got our plywood here, let's talk about how big the box needs to be. So what I did here was I took the dimensions of my wheel well, I added a 1/2 inch of airspace, 2 inches for rigid foam, and a 1/2 inch for the plywood itself, giving me an overall height of 3 inches to the outside of the dimensions of the wheel well here. Now, obviously, if you live in a colder climate, you might want to go with a bigger wheel well box so you can put more insulation in there, but that only makes sense if your walls have more insulation as well. It doesn't make sense to have a wall with an R13 R value and a wheel well with an R40 R value. So it's important to think about keeping things balanced. Now, once I went ahead and got my basic box dimensions, I also just wanted to kind of look at my frame here to see how it was going to nail on, because I want to make sure there's room to mount the cleats that this is going to need to mount to. And also I want to make sure that there's a little bit of room past the edges of the box to hook on my sheetrock or my tongue and groove or whatever I'm going to use on the inside of this. All right, so once you've got your overall dimensions, you can go ahead and cut out all your pieces of plywood. But before you go ahead and assemble this box, you want to take a moment and check to make sure that your corners are square and that you don't have any obstacles that you need to work around here, because while it is possible to do some surgery on your box after you've built it, it is way easier to do while it's still in pieces. So just to give you an idea of a problem that I faced right here, I had my end piece. This is actually a larger piece, but if you imagine this was smaller and this was my end piece, I tried to slide it in here and you could see how it bumped into this header right here, and also it's not perfectly square to the floor. So with this just as a free floating piece, it was super easy for me to push this all the way up against the adjacent stud. I could reach behind it here and mark out for the header, and I could scribe along the floor, and then I could take it out to my jigsaw and my chop saw, and I could nibble this out here so it would fit perfectly into this corner. And then at that point, I usually just make a little mark here and a little mark on the floor so I know that this is the piece that goes to this corner and I don't get confused and I don't accidentally flip these around. Okay, so now that we've got all the pieces here fitted nicely to each other and nicely to the trailer as well, we can go ahead and assemble the box. Now, the glue that we're going to be using for this is Type Bond 2 wood glue, and the nailer I've got here is an 18 gauge brad nailer with 1.5 inch brads in it. Now, if you haven't assembled any free-floating cabinetry like this before, you're going to want to take some scrap wood and do some glue and some nail connections just so you can get a sense of the process before you get into moving really quickly through the build. Now, this Type Bond 2 here only has about a 5-minute working time before it starts to get really tacky, so you want to make sure that you're well organized before you get started, and then you can go ahead and put the glue on, come behind it, and shoot it with your brads, you know, anywhere between 4 and 6 or 8 inches apart. I don't think it really matters. And I want to give you a little bit of a warning here that it is very tempting with free floating pieces like this to hold it right where you're nailing so you keep everything nice and flush. And that will keep it nice and flush, but it also has a chance of the nail kicking out the side and going into your finger. And that's something I've done quite a few times. I'm probably going to keep doing it because I'm an idiot, but if you don't want to shoot your finger, make sure you keep them out of the way while you're shooting this. Now, if you're a little bit messy with your wood glue here, that's not really a big deal because this Type Bond cleans up really easily with water. So if you've got some glue that's dripping out the sides, just make sure that you have a wet rag handy and you can wipe it off and then you can dry it off and you're not going to end up with glue stains on the front of your cabinet. Now that we've got the box built here, we can go ahead and push this up against our wall, get it nice and aligned over our wheel well, and we can mark out along the sides and along the bottom for the marks that we're going to use to reference our cleats off of. Now, you're not going to mark the long runs from the front to the back because this plywood is probably going to be warped a little bit, which means it wouldn't be a straight line. So we're going to use our 8-foot straight edge to connect those lines together. So once I've got all this marked out, I can take my box out of the way. And then I've already got the cleats nailed in here, but if you imagine the cleats are not nailed in, the best way to figure out exactly where these need to be is just to get the cabinet material that you're using, just a little scrap of it, and put it up against the inside of that line that you just made, and then draw a line to the inside of it, and on the top and the sides here as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a second line to the inside that you can use to line up these cleats. Now, I was just mentioning that you want to use your 8-foot straight edge to make this long line here, so I just go ahead and take that guy, put it on the floor, and then connect these two long lines here so you have a really nice straight edge to line your cleat up with. Okay, so let's talk about these cleats here. What these are is 3/4 inches thick by 2 inches wide, and when I set these, I put them in construction adhesive and then I nail them down to the inside of this pencil line right here. Now, I used 3/4 inch birch ply for this, but that's probably overkill for the application. I think just any good clear wood that you both nail and glue into this area is going to be more than fine. Okay, so for insulating this box, this is a great place to use up any extra foam insulation that you have sitting around from other projects. We had a little bit of foam left over from our floor and from our ceiling, so I just went ahead and took this over to the table saw because a table saw is by far the easiest way to cut foam, and you can also cut it on a chop saw as well. And I just took all the extra scraps that I had and I started puzzling them together until I got enough foam to fill up this box, but stopped 3/4 of an inch or maybe just a little bit more from the edges on all sides so this could mount on top of the cleat. Now, when you're gluing this in, the right way to do this is to use some of this foam board adhesive here, but if you don't have this, clear silicone construction adhesive, it's all going to work. This stuff just grips a little bit better. And you can also back this up with some spray foam, and this is the more professional spray foam gun. It's actually not very expensive. It's only 20 bucks on Amazon to get a cheap one of these. And if you're going to be using this around your windows, your doors, or anywhere else in the trailer, I would highly recommend getting yourself one of these guns because the difference in the quality of your insulating between that and just those little spray cans you get is like night and day. So big fan of these guns, although they do have a bit of a learning curve and you have to make sure that you clean them out when you're using them. All right, so now that I got my box insulated here, last thing I'm gonna do is get myself some 220 or some 180 grit sandpaper. I'm gonna sand the whole box down, make it nice and smooth, break any rough edges, and I'm gonna test fit this thing in place, make sure it's gonna fit in there perfectly before I apply any sealant to this. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my foam gun here, open it up a little bit, and I'm just gonna go ahead and squirt the inside of my cleats here. So Now this foam here is the window and door foam, and it's really important that this is the variety that you're using because the regular foam will expand too much. The window and door foam is great because it expands well, but it's also compressible. And we're looking to create an air seal here, but not so much foam expansion that it actually displaces the cabinet. So now that I've got my foam on here, get any little bits that aren't good, I'm going to go ahead and mount the cabinet in place. So I'll go ahead and take my cabinet, slide it in here. It locks in there nice and tight. Take my brad nailer and start nailing off this cleat. Make sure you push really hard so it's really locked in there. Push as hard as you can. Get this thing super locked in all the way along. So anyways, that's basically the whole installation there. I'm going to go ahead and finish nailing this off here in a minute, and I have got a nice, beautiful, tight, well insulated, well air sealed, really strong, really lightweight box out for my trailer here that still leaves plenty of space, and everything is square and strong. So if I want to, I can notch out for my cabinets or build in built-in cabinets right up off of this. Just really good, really simple, clean way to do it. All right, so that's my method for boxing out wheel wells. If you want to check us out on our website, we are actuallytiny.com, where we've got a growing library of tiny house resources, including a lot of other free instructional videos just like this one. You can also follow us on Instagram. We are actuallytiny, where we post a daily build blog of this entire process, including time-lapse videos of everything we're doing, including the wheel well box outs right here. All right, I think that's it for now. Take care, be safe with your tools, have fun building your tiny house. I will see you next time.